Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We're very fortunate to have Shaykh Ahmed Haneef, who will be speaking to us about the 12th Imam. Given today's date being the 15th of Sha'ban and the birth anniversary of the 12th Imam. Shaykh Ahmed Haneef is a scholar who's known to have style. His intimate knowledge of East and West and energy and love of all things spiritual has placed him as a favorite amongst young Muslims everywhere. He was born in Trinidad in the 50s and was raised a Roman Catholic, but he grew up during the 60s and 70s witnessing a number of different movements. At university, or just after, he took his Shahada, and in 1980 he became a Shia, following the revolution in Iran. Today he continues to combine his study with action and regular lectures in masjids across the world, and he propagates the spirit of Islam as something which is very close to his heart. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Shaykh Ahmed Haneef with Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Barik alaika ajma'in. Wa salatu wa salam ala rasulihi wa habibihi Abdul Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Nice to meet you all, and especially for us here on the lockdown, wherever you might be, in fact. I wish you safety, and I wish you great insight and making the best of your lockdown experience. The topic I want to talk about tonight is called Walking in the Path of the Imam of Our Time. Walking in the path of our Imam of our time, of the Imam of our time. There are two kinds of followers. So one of the reasons why I decided to approach this subject. There are two kinds of followers. There are followers who do not anticipate the direction or the decisions of their leaders. That is, these are followers who always await an order after a task is finished. Their position is one just of that. Just like that, to be a servant or to be a functionary of their leader, whoever their leader might be. And then you have another kind of follower. You have a follower who is the epitome of the leader himself. It's like the follower is an extension of the leader. Whatever the leader anticipates, the follower already has it. A good example of this would be a new version of the battle in Karbala, how Abbas alayhi salam got martyred. And it is said that both him and Imam Hussein alayhi salam rode towards the river. And while they were riding towards the river, they were riding a gauntlet. There were enemies surrounding them. And Abbas was leading, okay? He was, as they would say in American football, running interference. He was removing the obstacles, the enemy obstacles in the path for the Imam to come. And it is said that wherever Abbas turned, it was like he was turning the same way Imam Hussein would turn. He would be anticipating the leader even though he was in the lead, and they were moving in coordination. And unfortunately, they got cut off from each other, and he was martyred on the banks of the Euphrates. So you have another type of a follower. And these are the types of followers. This follower who can anticipate the leader, who has qualities like the leader, that type of follower. These are the ones who end up replacing the leader when the leader is, let's say, for example, killed in battle, incapacitated, or needs a deputy to stand in his stead. So when we say we are walking the path of the Imam, we are talking about this second case, especially. And it must be so because we have to prepare ourselves for inheriting the earth. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. And we desired to be gracious to those who were abased in the earth, and to make them leaders and to make them inheritors, Now, yes, many of the commentaries on this particular verse say that they're talking about the Imams, yes, because they are the epitome of those who are oppressed in the earth. You know, they are the epitome of those who are equipped to be the inheritors. Yes, but they also represent us who are oppressed in the earth. Also represent us who are oppressed in the earth. It also represents us who are the inheritors of the earth. You know, and then we look at history. We see history always goes through cycles. You know, those who are oppressed today will end up being nothing tomorrow, and those who were oppressed yesterday will end up being their rulers tomorrow. And so this is what it means. Now, how do we follow the path of the Imam? How do we follow the path of the Imam? Well, there's one very interesting hadith which tells us in which category we must find ourselves. There's a hadith by Imam al-Kazim alayhi salam, who says, there are three types of human beings. The first one is a person of nobility, al-Arab. Okay, it means Arab. Okay, but it means a noble Arab, an Arab of noble birth and background. Okay. The person of nobility. Secondly, the protected ally, which means the Mawla, the protected ally, and the vile person, elj, meaning a person who is uncouth, person who is rude, person who has no culture, no sophistication, somebody who is vile, somebody who is cruel, that type of a person. And he continues, he said, we are the nobles of pure descent. We are the Arab. The protected ally is the one, or the Mawla, is the one who faithfully loves us. And the base person is the one who openly disassociate themselves from us and openly declare themselves our enemy. Now, when we hear this hadith, it is very clear that the hadith is not literal. It is symbolic. The symbol of the noble person, the leader, is the Arab, but not any Arab, okay? The Arab in terms of the Ahl al-Bayt. When we look at the accounts of the role of the Arabs in terms of following the Imam, according to Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that they would be few in number. So the majority of the people who follow the Imam are going to be non-Arab, or we call them Ajam. And it again stands to reason, because as Islam spread, the majority of people in the world are non-Arab. The majority of Muslims in the world are non-Arab. So there is that aspect of it. But there's also a kind of a sinister, if one could call it that, aspect of it as well, because many of these hadith talking about the last days, the confrontation of the Imam with people who oppose him, they talk about a special type of punishment, a special type of bloodshed for the Arabs, and it's not because they're just Arab, it is because of maybe their alliance with the status quo, the fact that some of the Imams say, because many of them are the ones who kill the Imams themselves, and so forth and so on. And when we look at the role of the Arab nations today, we see the loss of spiritual quality, really, in many of those societies. Rocked by corruption, by ethnocentrism, and many, many other faults that are found in equal measure in the world. So um, it's talking about contemporary realities. I remember one sheikh in Qom interpreting the miracle of the sun rising from the west and setting in the east as a sign of the coming of the Imam. He said that this is the rise of Islam in the west and the setting of Islam in the east. And again, we see this type of thing happening. There are reversals and turnovers that are taking place. Muslims at one time would have been noble. Today, they are now marched over by everybody from Hindus to Jews. This is the problem that we have in our existence in society in the world today. So this hadith is actually talking about the inner state of people. Okay, the inner state of people is that they should be either one of these three categories. One category where you are either the nobility, this nobility meaning something more like the philosophic king of Plato or the Imam in Shiism, the divinely guided ruler. And that nobility represents an inward nobility. And then we have the mawali, which word comes from wala, which means loving leadership, right? Or loving leadership, loving friendship. That you are following somebody is your wali, somebody has your authority over you based upon love and the responsibility that grows out of that love. Love itself is a unifying emotion or state because it unifies the beloved with the lover. And this unity, again, is represented in this word Mawla, or a protected ally or client. This motif, this idea that talks about or represents the relationship of the Shia to their Imams or to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam as something organic, something as sort of a continuation of the existence of these illustrious people, are also found in other hadith as well. One of the hadith, for example, it talks about the Shia themselves, and it describes the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam as a tree, the Prophet being the trunk of this tree. And when a Shia is born, a leaf comes out on this tree, and when a Shia dies, the leaf falls from that tree. And so here's another example again where the Shia share in some kind of spiritual, existential continuity with the Ahlul Bayt. So here again we have another similar motif that talks about the Mawali or the Mawla, the people who are the allies of the Imams, meaning the partisans or the Shia of the Imams. And their relationship, even though they're not Arab, is a relationship of love, which implies a kind of unity. And he says that they are the Arabs, and we Shia are the followers, and the vile persons are those, the Imam says, the base person is the one who openly disassociate themselves from us and declare themselves our enemy. Now, it would be a bit simplistic of us to say that these people, the base people, are the Abbasids and the Umayyads, because we're talking about the last days, right? And the last days, you don't have any Abbasids and Umayyads running around, unless some of them are sent back to pay in the war against the Imam. You don't have that. But so when we're talking about people who disassociate themselves from us, what do the us represent The us represents the truth. The us represents religion. The us represents spiritual wisdom. The us represents those who submit themselves to God. The us represents all of these things. So those people who disassociate themselves from us are those people who disassociate themselves from all of those spiritual things that describe the Imams. It doesn't really matter what religion you are. Whether you're Christian, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Jew, everybody to a certain extent always have the same criteria to distinguish spiritual people. And indeed, every society sees spiritual people to be the paragons and examples for people to follow. We live in a society right now, for example, where even in high school, kids are proud to say, I'm not religious. People walk around with atheism as a badge of intelligence, as somebody who's free from religion. This is people disassociating themselves from what the Imams are identified with. These are the people who are the base people, and who declare themselves our enemy. Who declare themselves our enemy. Sabana. Now, that means they fight a war against religion in general. And yes, against Shiism in particular, of course. But people fight against it. Well, not only do they disassociate themselves then, but they are busy conducting wars against those people who still associate with God. And again, you could look at many of the wars in the Middle East and so forth that we can cite to talk about this, or to prove this. Now, one of the things that this relationship indicates, one, is that you are of a special group. And being of that special group, the Mawali, being of that special group, to be part of that group, one needs to be initiated. Now, what do I mean by initiated? A person could be a non-Muslim. Okay, and by a non-Muslim, it means that person does not declare that there's no God but one God, Allah, that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and and so on. Right? That makes a person a Muslim. A person can be a professor in Arabic studies and a professor in Islamic studies, but not be a Muslim. Does that person benefit from Salah? No, they don't. As long as they do not say the Shahadatain, they cannot benefit from Salah. Even though they make 1,000,000 Salahs, they cannot benefit from it. It is by reciting the Shahadatain that opens a door of grace for that person, that whenever they carry out any of the a'mal of Islam for something or for some effect, they will get it. This is what we mean by initiation. Initiation creates the spiritual climate for somebody to receive the spiritual benefits in belonging to that particular religion. And so we Shias, we have a type of initiatory relationship with our Imams. We bear witness to them. We give our bay'ah to them, not necessarily in an openly formal way, but we do say it when we say Ashhadu anna Aliyan Waliullah, and that his descendants and so forth. This is basically giving a bay'ah. This is basically making a declaration, making a statement that initiates you into the Shia Barakah. And so therefore, one of the most important steps to take in terms of stepping onto the path that the Imam has laid before us is the path of initiation, is the path of consciously following them, consciously acknowledging their existence and that we are on the path that they are on. One of the things that we look at, we discover in this particular hadith is that we have a situation of antagonism. We have a situation of antagonism. On one level, we have tawalla a relationship based upon love, and the other lesson, on the other side, we have tabarra, a relationship based upon disassociation, or one could even call it hate, right? We just don't say hate because sometimes hate is associated with things like, rage and the overflowing of emotions that you can't control and so on. But it's a kind of a hate, right? It's tawalla, and tabarra. And this is also a very important thing, a very important aspect to be walking the path of the Imam, because this world is a world of antagonism. Allah says to Adam and Eve, to get down from here, one of you will be an enemy to the other. This is the place where enmity can find concrete expression. Not in the higher realms of the Empyrean, but on this earth. It is on this earth we have the clash, the cosmic clash of good and evil. And therefore it becomes important to us to be able to distinguish the forces of good and evil in the world that we have. We must be able to align ourselves with that. To align ourselves in favor of that which is good, and to align ourselves against that, or to array ourselves against that which is evil. And this is how we couch this life in this earth. It is one where we are faced with obstacles that we have to overcome. And these obstacles, to a certain extent, are our enemies. And especially so in religion, where you have those people who are trying to destroy our religion. In Shiaism, this world is the site for this perpetual conflict. On one side, you have the Imam and their followers, and on the other side, the enemies of the Imam and their followers. And what we see constantly through Shia religious history or spiritual history is always the confrontation between these two negative forces. We also have complementary forces. Opposites are not only mutually exclusive or enemies to each other, but mutually complementary, and supporters of each other. Like, for example, the sky and the earth, rainfall and soil, and things like that. Teacher and student, these are opposites, but these opposites are complementary. And so we find on one side then the complementary opposites of the Imam and follower are opposed to the complementary opposite of Taghut and their followers, of the arrogant and their followers. And so for us as a Shia, we need to ask ourselves, who are those people who are fighting against oppression, right? Whether it be spiritual oppression, whether it be social oppression, whether it be political oppression. You ask yourself, who are fighting against this? And who are the oppressors? And we, just as, they say that following the Imam in the last days, there would be people from many different religions. It's not just Muslims or Shias who will be following the Imams, there might be people who might have been card-carrying Sunnis who would be following the Imams, or people who had considered themselves to be Christian who would be following the Imams. And similarly, us too, in this society, we don't just look for allies among our own ranks, especially when in the last days, many of the implacable enemies of the Imam will be Muslims themselves, including Shias. It's a very, very interesting hadith mentioned by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, I believe, in Kitab al-Ghayba, where it talks about the Qa'im, or the one who uprises. And it says the Qa'im will have to combat ignorance even greater than that faced by the Messenger of God during the Jahiliyyah. You have to fight even greater jahl, more than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to fight in the time of Jahiliyyah. For at that time of the at the time of the Prophet, the people worship stones, rocks, plants, and wooden statues. But when our Qa'im will summon the people. They will oppose him and interpret the entire book of God against him, and will argue against him and use the book of God to fight him. And this indicates that many of these enemies will be Muslims. So here we have a sophisticated type of a development. It's no longer, Muslims and kuffar, right, or mushrikeen. It's no longer that. It's Muslims being opposed by Muslims. It's Muslims being opposed by Muslims who are reinterpreting the Holy Book. Why are they reinterpreting the Holy Book? Because in a negative way. They are reinterpreting a Holy Book in a negative way because they live the culture of kufr. They live in a world that is filled with injustice and oppression, right? And that world that is filled with injustice and oppression has to be a world of kufr. And that world of kufr will put up things that will be idols. But these idols would not be of wood and stone. These idols will be in the area of things like ideas, okay? Like ideas, like movements, like things like that. Today, for example, we have, phenomena like, a feminist reading of Quran, from within Islam. Not a feminist reading of Quran to criticize Islam from the outside. No, a feminist reading of Quran as Muslim feminist women, okay, reading Islam from a feminist point of view. Where did feminism originate? Was there any such thing as an Islamic feminism? And it's not that we are not not against the oppression of women. We are against this, you see. But where did this idea originate? Where did this idea originate that Islam is democratic? Regardless of whether if we have a negative or a positive attitude towards democracy, where did we get this idea from? You see? And so what we do is we judge our Quran, we interpret our Quran based upon those ideas, those thoughts, those preferences that we have been acculturated to. And this is why you'll find a whole lot of Muslims behaving like that. We have this phenomenon taking place here right now, where Muslims use Quran to argue against other Muslims. So this is something that we have to be separate from. One other very, very important criterion that we must have, or character that we must have, is patience. Patience, especially in the time of the Ghaiba, where it is long and people start losing their patience. People start saying, when is this long thing going to end? And people start turning their backs on it. People start forgetting that they are actually living at a time when the Imam is alive. They start forgetting these things, and then they start falling a wrong path. So patience is something very, very important to have. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, the hasteners, meaning those who want to hasten the zuhur because they find it taking too long, the hasteners will perish, and those nearest to Allah will be saved. Means those people who are patient, those people who are dependent upon Allah only for the appearance of the Imam, they will be saved. So he says, keep to your homes, because seditions will be against those who cause them. What he's talking about is a time coming where there will be lots of disunity, lots of conflict between Muslims, between Shias, between Sunnis, internecine fights and all these types of things. People align themselves whether they're pro-West or pro-East and things like that. Stay in your homes, stay away from those things, and try to stay close to God. This is one of the other things that is very, very important. I want to mention a couple of signs that I think is very important for us to be aware of as well, to be able to walk in the path of the Imam. One of the things that we see is widespread injustice and oppression, so it behooves us to be standing up against injustice and oppression. Injustice and oppression, not on just only the dramatic basis, like, for example, physical oppression, human rights abuses and so forth and so on. Not just those, but also the internal oppression, internal spiritual oppression. Making good bad and bad good. You know, uh, uh, you know, adorning the bad so that it could be attractive to us, changing the goalposts, changing the rule of things, making, for example, certain forms of association become normal forms of association become uh, haram and assuming others and so forth and so on. These are the things that turn over. We live in a time where everything is topsy-turvy. And so the values become inverted and abused. So this is one. The other one is the fact that people are distant from religion. It says that people are afraid to even mention the name of Allah. We're getting to that point. People are even afraid to mention the name of Allah. We find inversions in terms of male-female relationships. Men and women, men start to look like women and women start to look like men. And in fact, men become subservient to their wives in particular or to their women in general. These are also aspects that are prevalent in this time. It is a time when force and might, physical might, would become something of a value. And so people would consider forbearance and weakness, right? People who would forbear, people who would be patient with something, they would consider that as weakness, and they would see oppression as pride. And we find the situation happening right now with, for example, the betrayal of JCPOA. All these countries that were participants in JCPOA knew that America was doing something wrong by withdrawing from it, but did nothing, absolutely nothing, to try to stop America or to try to compensate for that betrayal of international law. We have many cases like this. Lying is something that is discovered by the politicians, and nothing is done about it. So these are some of the most important signs of the time that we will see, where we have to be really careful about, because we could end up becoming participants in that. Okay, I would stop here now and leave the floor open to questions. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Sheikh, for your talk and giving the opportunity for us to hear about your insights on this topic. We haven't actually had any questions on YouTube or on the different channels, but I thought I'd give myself the opportunity to ask a question as I do have that chance.
Sure.
Obviously, with Imam Mahdi being such a central part of the Shia experience and the Shia madhab in that sense, you've talked about many different elements of that. Is there one thing that you think is the distinguishing factor that makes Imam Mahdi that so important for us and actually for wider Muslim communities, that we just do not give enough prominence to? Is there something that we really do not pride ourselves enough in, or do not promote enough about Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, that really, is there one thing specifically that we're not doing well enough in this regard?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think one of the reasons for it is that like now we don't talk about Imam Mahdi normally we talk about it on the 15th of Sha'ban, but we do not engage with this idea or this reality at all. And I think it's a mistake, you know. And I think it's a mistake because I think we tend to think according to the terms of the society in which we live. What I mean is this. If I ask an ordinary person, if I tell an ordinary person, I believe in a man who has not died for over 1,000 years, okay, and who could probably live for another 1,000, and who hasn't aged at all. Some people laugh me out of the planet, you know. But if I tell you, a cyborg, all right, you know, or a humanoid robot, you know, could live for 10,000 years. People could understand that. People could admit that possibility because this is what sci-fi movies are made of. Okay? And also the idea that a superior machine to a human being is just that, a machine. That the human being is not the most sophisticated machine ever. It is the most sophisticated machine ever. But they think that the human body cannot be prepared, you know, to be able to transcend itself. This is a big area that we can discuss, and we can get our children to understand because the Imam, is not the only person that is quote unquote a sort of semi-immortal. You know, Hazrat Isa alayhi salam has not been with us for a long time. Hazrat Khizr, walks the earth just like the Imam, but nobody recognizes him. And he's been around for longer than the Imam in terms of length of life. Also to talk about Hazrat Elijah, who is on one of the, in his body, he's on one of the levels of paradise. So we have many of these things that we can talk about to our children and so forth, and we can make this very live. And the next thing I think is very important is that we have to strive to get to meet him, and we can meet him. You see, we can meet him. And one of the things that we can do to be able to meet him is to study the lives of people who have met him and see how they live their lives, what they do in their lives that sparked off this interest by the Imam to meet them. And we do the same thing. And inshallah, the Imam becomes a more living and accessible reality for us.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on that, is given the mainstream Muslim Sunni position on the Mahdi is that he will come from the future. Does it really matter? Does our position or our difference with the mainstream Muslim communities on this really matter? Does it matter that the Mahdi, from their perspective will be someone else, but from our perspective is already born? Does that difference, do you think, matter in the future way that we think about the end of times? Do you think that that's important as a difference, or is that something we should emphasize as something that's very important for our belief that in that difference, or do you think it's something that actually in the end doesn't really matter?
I think it's yes and no. I think it's 50-50 or both. Why? Why does it matter? Well, he's our living Imam, and we can make contact with him. He can intervene with God on our behalf. He can give us guidance in these trying times. When we hear about the imposed war against Iran and an outnumbered country, an outgunned country like Iran had to face alone a basically third world war fought against them by proxy, they really did need divine help, and they got it. The people were seeing sightings of the Imam on the battlefield. I think the same thing was said on the battlefield of Lebanon in 2009 when the Israelis invaded. So yes, to know your Imam is alive and so on does matter. But when it comes to, let's say, the Imam's activities when he does appear, Whether it does appear in a Sunni context or a Shia context, it doesn't really matter because he'll be doing the same things. Basically the same signs, the same occurrences are going to take place. And it wouldn't really matter whether he was born, some years before he had to fight or was born, 1,000 years or so before. So I think we should not really start to split hairs with Sunnis upon whether he was born or he's yet to be born. I think we should leave this to ulama to discuss among themselves. I think what's important is that we should accept that he is a reality in our religion and he has a particular part to play in the reform of the world.
Thank you very much. We've had one question that's come through saying, what are the best ways to distinguish good and bad in Mahdi and Dajjal? So, for example, you can find many good in some projects, for example, feminism. So is there a percentage? How is their guidance able to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong?
Yes. Evil cannot present itself to human beings as evil. Human beings will run away from it. Evil has to present itself to human beings as good. So human beings can be attached to it. When the shaitan appeared to Hazrat Hawa and Hazrat Adam, alayhim as-salam, in the garden, he presented himself not as a devil, but as a wise old man. Yeah. And this is the same thing with ideologies. Ideologies, claim to be for the betterment of man, for social justice, and so forth and so on. Okay. We need to study these things. I mean, I don't think I could give you like a formula as such to be able to distinguish between the right things and the wrong things. We need to be able to study these things. Yes, liberal democracy may have certain positives. It also has certain negatives. What are these negatives? Let's use our mind, and then we can extract from these things, general principles by which we can judge different situations and to be able to make sense of them. Take, for example, the corporate media today. Okay? One rule that you can have with the corporate media is the corporate media is there to conform your thinking to that of the ruling powers. That's it. Okay? Should we read the corporate media? Should we look at the corporate media? Should we study it? Yes, we should. Because we can learn from what they don't mention what is important for us and what they mention as might be important for them and how they talk about things, for example. Take, for example, the word regime. Whenever the media uses the word regime, when you hear the word regime, what comes to your mind? A government that is not there by an elected people, by people who elected it. Okay? A regime is something that is imposed on people. So when they talk about the Syrian regime and the Iranian regime, it is regardless of whether they have, elections. People wouldn't see elections. They see a government imposed on the people. You see, and therefore it creates the people to support the government for their imperialist ambitions. Why doesn't, for example, the corporate press not refer to the Saudi regime? Nobody elects the Saudi government, okay, or the Saudi king and his henchmen. Why don't they say the Saudi regime? They don't say the Saudi regime because they are friends with it. Why don't they say the Gulf state regimes? They don't say that because they are friends with it. You see, so we have to teach our people, ourselves, our children, how to be discriminatory in looking at news, looking at political ideologies and so forth, to be able to arrive at a proper and educated decision as to whether they're true or whether they're false.
Thank you very much. Another question's come through. You mentioned that we have the opportunity to meet the Imam Mahdi alayhi salam as well. But it's been also said that if anyone claims to have met, the Imam has said, or has been reported to have said, if anyone claims to have met me, he is a kadhab, he is a liar. How do you reconcile these different points?
All right. They're not mutually contradictory at all, when we can meet the Imam, but when we meet the Imam, we must conceal his secret. We must respect his secret. His secret is what? that he is an occultation, that he is hidden. And so we have to hide him too. Yeah. And this is why you should not. Now that statement is not an absolute statement that a person who says that they met the Imam is a liar. It's not an absolute statement. Because all of the accounts that we know of people who have met the Imams, they told it to somebody, but they did not get up and make a proclamation to the people to draw attention to themselves, and so therefore they might make themselves some kind of naib of the Imam or something. You find that what we know about these people only comes to light after they pass away. You see, somebody writes a book or somebody does some research and finds out that not that just this person saw the Imam, but it is corroborated by how they live their lives. Okay, they live their lives of helping people, they live their lives of honesty, they live their lives of complete sincerity to their deen. You know, other people had great respect for them and love for them. Everybody loved them. Huh? And this is the wisdom in in forbidding people to say that they met the Imam. You know, one, because you have to keep it secret, and two, this not saying it to people creates ego problems and people making you special and so forth, and the ordinary person might not be able to handle that. You know, not saying it keeps you controlled. You know, and that type of person is a good person who meets the Imam, and people would know that person from there. So it's not a contradiction at all.
Thank you very much for that. Another question has come through. Given that we know that opposition to al-Mahdi will come from within all Muslim groups, how do we reconcile being both scrutinizing of our own Shia communities, but also being supportive?
Again, there's no paradox with that. You know, it's like parents. You know, a parent could criticize a child and also support them. A good teacher does that. You know, it depends on how you criticize them, of course. You know, and support does not mean support them in their wrong. You know, and I think this is the same with us. You know, what does our community support? You know, is our community one that is to bear witness to mankind as to the truth of this deen, or is it one that is content with ghettoizing itself in London, let's say, you know, and not be open to others coming among their ranks, joining them, and so forth, you know? So, you know, we can be very critical, self-critical in a loving way with our own communities. Why not? You know, all of these signs of what they're talking about will be the signs before the coming of the Imam, you know, where men dress up as women and women dress up as men, you know, where young people insult the old and they lose respect for the old and so forth. You know, all of these things we should be guarding against. All of these things our masajid, our center should be telling us that we should be guarding against and monitoring ourselves in our friendships with each other, for example, you know, to make sure that we are on the right path. There's a very beautiful hadith by the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says, a good friend is somebody who could criticize you. You know, and a bad friend is one who lets your faults go. Let it, you know, do not criticize your faults. You see, and so as Muslims in a community with our friends and so forth, we are good sources for guiding them and helping each other get better.
Thank you very much, and you know, it was really enlightening to hear your thoughts and your views on this topic, and it's good to hear and to see the enthusiasm of the audience asking lots of questions. And I think that today, that's it for today. I think we're going to end there, if that's okay. And thank you very much for coming and for sharing your thoughts. And
thank you.
Look forward to seeing you hopefully in person next time, inshallah.
Inshallah. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Masalam.